Gerald Marsh was on his second cup of coffee when the phone rang, 7:14 in the morning. He looked at it once, then let it ring. 4 times, then he picked up. The voice belonged to a lawyer named Harlan Fitch, junior partner, Columbus firm. Big enough to have a receptionist and a parking garage and the kind of letterhead that was supposed to make people nervous before they even read the first line. Harlan did not sound like a man in control of his morning. Gerald already knew why, Mr. Marsh, Harlan said. Gerald took a sip. Tell me something I don't know, he said. The line went quiet for a moment. Harlan Fitch was the kind of lawyer who expected people to be nervous when he called. Gerald Marsh was not nervous. He had not been nervous about this particular piece of land in 23 years. He set the mug down. He looked out the kitchen window at the North 40, still gray in the early morning light, frost on the grass, markers right where he had put them. Mr. Marsh, our client's Phase 2 construction has been flagged by the county. There's a drainage corridor issue that apparently, according to the county clerk's office, involves your property. Does it, Gerald said. It was not a question. Limestone County held its foreclosure auctions in the basement of the county administration building. Folding tables, a coffee urn running since 6. 47 people who came mostly to watch, because a farm going to auction on a cold April morning was still more interesting than anything else going on. Dale Pruitt ran it. Same brown blazer he'd worn to every sale since 1988. Fast voice, no questions, done by noon. The Marsh farm had been in default 11 months. 118 acres, a barn leaning the wrong direction, 2 dry wells. A drainage easement on the northern edge the county had flagged as unresolved since 1978 and never looked at again. Nobody in that room knew what the easement meant. Nobody except Gerald. He stood in the back in work boots and a canvas jacket that had seen too many winters. 61 years old. 40-minute drive in a truck with a cracked windshield. $4,700 in his checking account and a folded piece of paper in his left coat pocket he had been carrying for 2 years. He poured himself a coffee from the urn and stood near the wall and did not speak to anyone. Bidding opened at $31,000. Boyd Carver raised first, Cincinnati developer. Leased Cadillac parked in the fire lane out front. Business card said Carver Capital Group in embossed letters. Pressed khakis, cell phone holster. The settled look of a man who had done this 31 times and had never once been surprised by how any of them ended. Boyd raised to $38,000 and looked around the room like he was already measuring for furniture. Gerald raised his paddle, $39,500. The room went still. Dale Pruitt looked up. Boyd turned around. A woman near the coffee urn said something to the man beside her, and the man laughed, not loud, just the easy laugh of someone watching a situation whose ending seemed obvious. A worn jacket bidding against a developer from Cincinnati. The math didn't seem hard. Gerald did not look up. Boyd raised to $41,000. Gerald to $42,200. Boyd raised to $44,000 without turning around. Gerald raised his paddle again, $46,000. Boyd turned fully now. He looked at the boots, the jacket. He ran the private calculation men like Boyd always run and arrived at the answer he always arrived at. He raised to $46,500. Gerald raised one last time, $47,000. Boyd set his paddle down, shook his head once, walked out before the gavel landed. His Cadillac was gone from the fire lane before Dale Pruitt reached for his stamp. Gerald collected his receipt, folded it into his left coat pocket next to the other piece of paper, and drove 40 minutes home with the heat on and the radio off. Ruth already knew when he walked in. You got it, she said. I got it, he said. He sat at the kitchen table and looked out at 118 acres of tired farmland. Most of it wasn't worth much. The northern edge was a different matter entirely. Gerald knew what that strip was. He had known for 2 years. Nobody else in Limestone County did. Not yet. He sat at the table until the afternoon light shifted and Ruth called him for dinner, and he folded his hands and got up and went without saying a word about any of it. He did not write anything down that night. He did not make a single phone call. He just ate his soup and thanked Ruth for it and washed his own bowl and went to bed at 9 o'clock, the same as always. 23 years of patience had to start somewhere. It started at that kitchen table on a cold April evening in 2001 with a bowl of leftover chicken soup and a receipt folded in a coat pocket and a man who already knew exactly how this was going to end. If you think you know where this is going, you don't. Subscribe now and stay until the end, because what this old farmer found in a dusty county file is the last thing anyone in that room would have believed. October 1998, Limestone County Public Library, second floor, back corner. The room smelled like old paper and carpet cleaner and had not been reorganized in any meaningful way since a county volunteer project in 1971 that had made things worse, not better. 3 filing cabinets along the far wall, their labels typed on curling paper strips. Two long tables with metal legs that wobbled if you leaned on them wrong. A single overhead light that buzzed for the first 30 seconds every time you turned it on and then settled into silence. Gerald Marsh came every Tuesday. He signed in with the woman at the front desk, whose name was Barbara, and who had worked that desk since 1983, and who, after the third Tuesday in a row, stopped out asking Gerald what he was looking for and started leaving the filing cabinet keys on the table before he arrived. She never asked what he was researching. Gerald never explained. That arrangement suited them both. He was not a lawyer. He had a high school diploma from 1958, 30 years of farming experience, and a specific quality of attention that most people who met him mistook for slowness. He was not slow, he was careful. There is a difference, and it matters, and most people only understand the difference in hindsight. It had started with Dale Hinton. Dale was Gerald's neighbor to the west. Good man. Farmed corn and soybeans on 64 acres his father had left him. In the spring of 1997, a pipeline company came through Limestone County on a land acquisition run and made Dale an offer for 36 of those 64 acres. The number sounded large. Dale signed. He told Gerald about it over the fence one afternoon in June, pleased with himself, relieved to have the money. Gerald had listened and nodded and said the right things. But on the drive home, he felt something settle wrong in his chest. Not envy. He did not begrudge Dale the money. It was something quieter than that. The sense that Dale had handed over something whose real value he had never understood to a company that understood it completely. That the pipeline firm had not knocked on Dale's door because they were doing Dale a favor. They had knocked because they had read something Dale hadn't. Gerald decided he needed to start reading. He started with the county plat maps. Every recorded survey from 1943 forward, organized by township and range in 3 of the 4 filing cabinets. He worked through them slowly, one section at a time, cross-referencing parcel boundaries against the hand-drawn maps he made at home on graph paper each week before his Tuesday visits. He took notes in a green spiral notebook that Ruth had given him the previous Christmas, intended for grocery lists and farm records. Gerald numbered every page from the start. He wrote small and he wrote clearly, and he left margins wide enough to add things later. By October 1998, the notebook had 14 pages of notes and a map that covered 2 facing pages. Every parcel boundary in the western half of Limestone County drawn in pencil with ownership names beside each one. He moved to the road expansion surveys next. They were filed in the 3rd cabinet, bottom drawer, in folders that had not been pulled since the 1971 reorganization. Some of the folders had stuck to each other from years of sitting undisturbed. Gerald worked through them the way he worked through everything, one at a time, reading before touching, not pulling anything out until he understood where it fit. On a Tuesday in November 1998, he found the first thing. It was a survey from 1956, filed under a reference number that had been entered wrong in 1971. Transposed digits, a small clerical error that had made it invisible to anyone searching by location rather than number. The survey described a proposed widening of Route 14, the county road that ran along the northern edge of the parcel that would later become the Marsh Farm. At the time, the land belonged to a family named Eccles. The widening would have required a permanent right-of-way easement, 12 feet wide, running the full length of the northern boundary. The county had filed the easement instrument in 1957 in anticipation of the project. The road expansion was canceled in 1961 when the state redirected its infrastructure funding. But nobody had filed a dissolution of the easement. It was still there, recorded, legal, attached to the land through every subsequent transfer. The Eccles sale in 1969, 2 more sales after that, and the bank foreclosure that had put the land in default 11 months ago. Gerald wrote that down on page 19 of the notebook. He underlined it twice. He wrote the reference number in the margin and circled it. He sat with that for a long time before he put the survey back in its folder. He came back the next Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. The Drainage Commission minutes were in the 4th cabinet, organized by year. Most of them were brief, a few pages, routine maintenance approvals, the bureaucratic record of a county body that met 6 times a year and spent most of its budget on culverts. Gerald read every cent from 1970 through 1985. It took 6 Tuesdays. Barbara left him a fresh cup of coffee on the table on the 4th Tuesday without being asked. In March 1999, he found the second piece. The drainage easement on the northern strip, the one the county had flagged as unresolved since 1978, appeared in the commission minutes 3 separate times between 1974 and 1981. Each entry was short. Each one referenced the same underlying document, a 1974 corridor agreement establishing a 4.2-mile stormwater management corridor through the western portion of Limestone County. The corridor had been designed to serve a planned industrial development zone. The development zone had been abandoned in 1982 when the primary investor pulled out. When the zone was abandoned, the corridor's maintenance structure collapsed. The county had no legal mechanism to maintain infrastructure built for a private development that no longer existed. So in a single paragraph of a 1971 county infrastructure ordinance, an ordinance written before the corridor was even built, updated once in 1974 and never touched again, the maintenance authority reverted by default to the individual landowners along the corridor's path. The ordinance had never been amended. The northern strip of the Marsh parcel was the third parcel in that corridor. Whoever owned that strip held the legal maintenance authority for all 4.2 miles. And the same 1971 ordinance stated, in plain language that took Gerald 3 readings to be certain he understood it correctly, that any commercial development requiring stormwater drainage in the western zone needed written authorization from the active maintenance authority holder before breaking ground. Gerald circled that paragraph 3 times. He sat in that back corner room for a long time after that. The overhead light had long since stopped buzzing. The building was quiet. Barbara had gone home an hour ago and left the door on the latch. He was 60 years old. He had 30 years of farming and a high school diploma and $4,700 in a checking account. He was sitting alone in a county records room with a buzzing overhead light and a green spiral notebook that had started as a Christmas gift for grocery lists. He drove to the county clerk's office the next morning when it opened at 8. He paid $12 for a certified copy of the 1974 corridor agreement. He kept the original survey in the notebook, sealed in a plastic page protector he bought at the pharmacy on the way home. He put the certified copy in a tin box on the top shelf of the bedroom closet, behind Ruth's winter sweaters, where neither of them would look for it by accident. Then he went back to reading. Over the next several months, he drove the length of the drainage corridor twice, once in March, once in July. He walked sections of it where the land was accessible, looking at grade and drainage flow and the old culvert placements the county had installed in 1974 and not touched since. He noted which parcels sat along the corridor's path. He logged ownership changes using records from the county assessor's office at $3 per page, which added up but not as much as not knowing would cost. Most of the parcels were quiet, farmland, old family names. 1 or 2 had transferred recently in routine estate sales. But 3 of them, 3 specific parcels in the corridor's southwestern section, sat directly across the only viable western access route into the county's undeveloped commercial zone. The zone the county had been trying to attract development to for 15 years. The zone that was, according to a Planning Commission report from 1997 that Gerald had read in full, the target of renewed commercial interest from outside investors. In the fall of 1999, a shell company called Lakeview Holdings LLC purchased 2 of those 3 parcels. The transactions were filed at the county recorder's office 7 days apart. Gerald found them on a Thursday, not a Tuesday, because by then he was checking the recorder's new filings every week. 3 weeks later, Lakeview Holdings purchased the 3rd. Gerald wrote the LLC name and all 3 purchase dates in the notebook on page 31. He wrote the recorded instrument numbers beside each entry. He wrote the total acreage, 94 acres combined, assembled quietly over 6 weeks without a single public announcement. He looked at his hand-drawn map for a long time. The purchases were not random. Someone was building something. Working outward from a center point, acquiring land in a pattern that only made sense if you already knew where the infrastructure ran. The drainage corridor, the access route, the stormwater authorization requirement buried in a 1971 ordinance. The center point of the entire assembly, the one piece that everything else depended on, the parcel without which the drainage corridor authorization could not be obtained, the one strip of land that the 1971 ordinance required to be in cooperative hands before a single permit could be issued, was the northern strip of the Marsh farm, 12 feet wide, currently in bank foreclosure. The auction was 16 months away. Gerald set his pencil down. He looked at the map for a long time without moving. He closed the notebook. He did not tell Ruth everything that night. He sat at the kitchen table after dinner and answered her questions in short sentences and told her he had found something interesting in the county records and that he was still working through it. She did not press. She had been married to him for 33 years, and she understood the difference between Gerald thinking out loud and Gerald finished thinking. He was not finished, but he was close. And Gerald Marsh was a man who understood, in the bone-deep way of someone who had farmed through 3 droughts and 2 bad markets, that time handled right is the most powerful tool a person can carry. He had just found out what he was carrying. Now he had to decide when to use it. $320. That was the annual tax bill on the northern strip. Gerald paid it every April, same week, by check, in person at the county assessor's window. He had the receipt in a folder in the tin box by 2003. By 2005, he had 4 receipts. He mowed the strip twice a year. He kept the survey markers clear. He did not build on it. He did not fence it off. He just maintained it the way a man maintains something he intends to keep. The first offer came on a Thursday afternoon in the fall of 2004. A young woman knocked on the front door. She was polished. Clean car parked at the end of the driveway. She held a folder and smiled like she had practiced the smile in a car mirror before getting out. Her name was Collins, real estate agent out of Columbus. She was representing, she said, a client with strong interest in acquiring the northern portion of the Marsh property, specifically the strip along Route 14. How much? Gerald asked. $80,000, she said. The 40 acres on the northern edge, strip included. Gerald looked at her for a moment. No, thank you, he said. She kept smiling. I can take that back and see if there's flexibility. There isn't, he said. On my end. He closed the door. Ruth was at the kitchen table when he came back in. She had heard through the screen. She didn't say anything. She poured him a cup of coffee. He sat down and picked up the newspaper, and that was the end of it. Collins came back in the spring of 2005. This time the number was $110,000. Gerald declined from the porch without opening the door all the way. She did not come back after that. The second offer came by phone in August 2007. A county engineer named Bauer. He explained in a formal and friendly voice that Limestone County was planning a road expansion along Route 14 and would be acquiring easement rights from several property owners along the corridor. Gerald would receive fair market compensation for the 12-foot right-of-way along his northern boundary. Gerald asked Bauer to describe the proposed easement line. Bauer described it. Gerald told him calmly that the 1956 right-of-way survey had never been formally dissolved, that the easement on that boundary was already a recorded instrument, that any new acquisition would need to account for it before proceeding. There was a pause on the line. I'll need to look into that, Bauer said. You do that, Gerald said. 6 months later, the county rerouted the expansion. It did not touch the Marsh parcel. Gerald wrote the date in the notebook. That same year, his daughter Sarah came home for Thanksgiving. She was 24 then, studying law at Ohio State. She walked the property with him one afternoon, the two of them along the northern strip in the cold. She asked about the markers, the little orange flags Gerald had replaced that fall. Why do you keep those so clean, she asked. So nobody can say they didn't know where the line was, he said. She looked at him for a moment. She didn't ask anything else. She would remember that answer for a long time. The third offer came in 2011. Boyd Carver sent a letter on Carver Capital Group letterhead. No agent, no county official, Boyd himself, offering $380,000 for the northern 40 acres, strip included, with a 30-day closing timeline. Gerald read the letter at the kitchen table. Ruth read it over his shoulder. That's more than 8 times what you paid for the whole farm, she said. Yes, it is, he said, Gerald. He looked at her. When, she asked. When they need it more than they need to win, he said. She sat down across from him. She had been married to this man for 46 years. She had watched him sit at that table with maps, with filings, with county ordinances she never fully read. She had watched him say no 4 times to numbers that would have set them up for the rest of their lives. She trusted him. But trust, held long enough, sometimes needs a word back. I believe you, she said. She got up. She started the dishes. Gerald folded Boyd's letter and put it in the manila envelope in the tin box. In 2013, 3 weeks after Boyd Carver's fourth offer was declined by mail, a different entity filed a permit application with Limestone County for a 200,000 square foot distribution center in the Western Commercial Zone. The entity was called Lakeview Novacorp Development LLC. Boyd Carver was listed as a managing partner. A Lakeview lawyer named Harlan Fitch, 29 years old, 2 years out of law school, spent 3 days reviewing the permit file before he called his senior partner and said quietly that there might be a problem with the drainage corridor. The senior partner told him to look harder. Harlan looked harder. The problem was still there, and the problem had a name, Gerald Marsh. In the spring of 2019, a man in a 3-piece suit came to the front door, leather briefcase. Gerald had never seen him before. He introduced himself as legal counsel for Lakeview Novacorp. Gerald offered him coffee. The man accepted. They sat at the kitchen table. The man explained, in careful language, that his client had made significant infrastructure investments in the Western Commercial Zone, that certain drainage corridor rights were relevant to their long-term planning, that they were prepared to make a very serious offer for a permanent easement authorization. He said the number $1.4 million. Gerald drank his coffee. I'll think about it, he said. The man waited. Gerald said nothing else. The man thanked him, closed his briefcase, and drove back to Columbus. Gerald sat at the table for a while after that. The notebook was on the shelf above the stove. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He already knew every page. 5 years later, on a Tuesday morning in March 2024, the phone on the kitchen counter rang. Gerald looked at the screen. Unfamiliar number. Columbus area code. He picked up his coffee cup. He set it down. He reached for the phone. Mr. Marsh, Harlan Fitch again, older now, senior partner. Still not having a good morning. We'd like to meet, Harlan said. I know, Gerald said. He called Sarah that afternoon. She drove down from Columbus on Saturday with a briefcase and a copy of the permit file, and the same precise stillness she had inherited from her father and spent 12 years sharpening into a professional tool. She spread the permit file across the kitchen table next to Gerald's original deed and the green notebook, and she read in silence for 40 minutes. Then she looked up. They can't build phase 2 without your corridor authorization, she said. No, Gerald said. And they've known that for how long? Since 2013, he said, at least. She looked at the notebook. She looked at the deed. She looked at the drainage corridor filing from 1974, the certified copy Gerald had paid $12 for 25 years earlier. They're going to try the abandonment argument, she said. Let them, he said. She made the call back to Harlan Fitch on Sunday morning from the kitchen. 3 sentences. She told him they would meet in the county courthouse on Wednesday, that her client was prepared to resolve the matter, and that if Lakeview Novacorp intended to file an abandonment claim, they should bring their best documents, because she would be bringing 3. The hearing was short. Lakeview's lead attorney argued that the Drainage Maintenance Authority had been legally dormant for decades, and that Gerald Marsh had effectively abandoned the corridor right through non-exercise. Sarah placed 3 documents on the table. The first was the original 1974 corridor agreement certified. The second was the 1956 right-of-way survey, still recorded, never dissolved. The third was a letter Gerald had mailed to the Limestone County Drainage Commission in March 2003, formally registering as the active maintenance authority for the corridor and requesting a record acknowledgement. The county had replied in writing within 30 days. Gerald had kept both letters in the tin box behind Ruth's sweaters for 21 years. The abandonment argument requires non-exercise. The 2003 registration was an exercise. Sarah set the county's reply letter on the table and said 4 words. He never stopped. The hearing officer ruled in under 90 seconds. Lakeview's attorney reached for his phone before he had fully stood from his chair. The negotiation lasted 4 hours. Gerald refused a lump sum buyout. He refused 2 of them. He sat at the table with his hands folded and his coffee in front of him, and he did not raise his voice once. He set terms instead. A permanent annual easement authorization, paid monthly. $700-800 per month, indexed inflation, transferable to Sarah and her heirs upon Gerald's death. In exchange, Lakeview Novacorp received written corridor authorization for Phase 2 and all future phases of the Western Commercial Zone development. Harlan Fitch pushed back on the inflation clause, then on the transferability clause. Gerald waited. Harlan accepted both. Sarah called Gerald that evening. He was on the porch. They signed, she said. All right, he said. He went inside. Ruth had been gone 4 years. Her chair was still at the table. The kettle was on. He had put it on before he answered the phone, out of habit or something older than habit. He let it run. The signing was at the county clerk's office on a Thursday morning. Gerald wore the same canvas jacket, different boots. He signed his name in the same careful block letters he had used his whole life. He thanked the clerk, whose name was Teresa and who had worked that window for 19 years, and she said congratulations, and he said thank you, and that was all. He sat in his truck in the parking lot. He opened the green notebook to the last written page. He wrote the date. He wrote the monthly figure. He wrote 2 words, account settled. He closed the notebook. Somewhere across town, Boyd Carver read about the agreement in the Limestone County Gazette that Friday. A 3-paragraph item on page 6. He read it once. He folded the paper. He said nothing. The 47 people who had stood in that auction basement 23 years ago had scattered to their own lives by now. A few of them still lived in Limestone County. One of them, the woman who had laughed near the coffee urn, heard about the agreement from her neighbor and sat very still for a moment before changing the subject. Some men collect land. Gerald Marsh collected the one piece nobody else thought to read. Here's what Gerald paid for 118 acres in 2001, $47,000. Here's what Lakeview Novacorp will pay him every single month for the rest of his life, $700-800. That's more than $93,000 a year for a strip of land 12 feet wide. So here's the question. If you had been standing at that kitchen table in 2019 with a $1.4 million check in front of you, would you have taken it? Or would you have waited for the deal that pays you every month until you're gone? Tell us in the comments. And if this story hit the way it was supposed to, like a hammer, slow and then all at once, you know what to do.